The Galactic Council had existed for 47,000 years before humanity stumbled into their carefully ordered universe. In all that time, across hundreds of species and thousands of worlds, they had never encountered anything quite like the beings from Sol 3. Commander Daniel Price stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the star-filled viewport with an expression that would have troubled any of the Council's military analysts. He was smiling. Not the confident smile of a warrior certain of victory, nor the grim determination of a soldier facing impossible odds. It was something else entirely, something the other species would later struggle to classify in their reports. "Sir, the Vorkal fleet is moving into position," Lieutenant Katie Morrison reported from the tactical station. Her voice carried none of the fear that should have accompanied such an announcement. The Vorkal supremacy had conquered 42 star systems in the past decade. Their military doctrine was studied at every naval academy in the galaxy as the pinnacle of strategic warfare. "Good," Daniel said, his smile widening. "Let them get comfortable." The war had started 6 months earlier, though calling it a war was perhaps too generous. The Galactic Council had expected a brief police action, a simple matter of bringing an upstart species to heel. Humanity had been expanding too quickly, too recklessly, establishing colonies in systems that hadn't been properly surveyed, sending ships through regions of space that every sensible species avoided. The Council had sent the Vorkal to teach Earth a lesson. The Vorkal excelled at lessons. Their fleets were perfectly coordinated, their tactics refined over millennia of conquest. They followed the principles of rational warfare, the same doctrine that every Council species adhered to. Minimize losses, maximize efficiency, accept surrender when the mathematical probability of victory falls below acceptable thresholds. The Vorkal expected humanity to surrender after the first battle. They had destroyed 3 human colonies and crippled an entire defense fleet. By every calculation, by every historical precedent, Earth should have sued for peace. Instead, the humans had attacked. Admiral Karen Walsh had led that first counterattack, and the recordings of it were now required viewing at Council military academies, though not for the reasons she would have preferred. Her fleet had been outnumbered 3-1, outgunned, with no reasonable chance of success. The logical action would have been to retreat, regroup, and wait for reinforcements. Karen had ordered her ships to accelerate directly into the heart of the Vorkal formation. The Vorkal commander, a methodical strategist named Krelver, had watched in confusion as the human vessels came on, their engines pushed beyond safe limits, their weapon systems firing continuously even as they overheated. His analysts assured him it was a desperate feint, a distraction to cover a withdrawal. It wasn't. The human ships had rammed the Vorkal capital vessels at relativistic speeds. 3 human destroyers had sacrificed themselves to take down 2 Vorkal dreadnoughts. The trade wasn't strategically sound. It violated every principle of resource management. It was, by any rational standard, insane. Karen had won that battle by losing it. The Vorkal retreated, but not because they had been defeated militarily. They retreated because they could no longer predict what the humans would do next. Uncertainty was not something their doctrine could accommodate. "The Vorkal are hailing us," Katie announced, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. "Audio only. Put them through." The translator rendered the Vorkal commander's words in flat, emotionless English. "Human vessel, you are outmatched. We have 15 ships to your 3. Surrender now and you will be treated according to Council protocols." Daniel glanced at Lieutenant Jack Foster at the helm and Ensign Lisa Hayes at engineering. Both were young, barely out of the academy, but they had the same look in their eyes that he did, the look that had started to terrify the galaxy. "Negative, Vorkal command," Daniel replied. "But I appreciate the offer. Really I do, it shows you're learning." There was a pause. The translator struggled with human sarcasm. "You cannot win this engagement. The mathematics are absolute." "Mathematics," Daniel said, and now his smile took on an edge that would have sent ice through the veins of anyone who understood human expressions. "Let me tell you something about human mathematics. We invented a field called chaos theory. Do you know what it says? It says that complex systems are inherently unpredictable. That tiny changes can cascade into massive effects. That perfect planning is an illusion. You speak nonsense to delay the inevitable. No, I speak nonsense because it's fun. Katie, arm the fusion minds. Jack, I want you to do that thing you've been practicing. Jack's grin matched his commander's. The stupid thing or the really stupid thing? Surprise me. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for centuries. The horizon's edge, badly outnumbered and outgunned, began to spin. Not a tactical rotation, not an evasive maneuver, but a wild, seemingly random tumble through space, its engines firing in sequences that made no strategic sense. The Vorkal fleet's targeting computers struggled to track the erratic movement. Their perfectly coordinated firing solutions, calculated to account for every known human tactic, suddenly became useless. The humans weren't following patterns. They weren't following doctrine. They weren't even following their own previous behavior. While the Vorkal fleet attempted to adjust, Katie launched the fusion mines on trajectories that no sane tactical officer would approve. They scattered through the combat space like seeds thrown by a careless farmer, their courses seemingly random. They weren't random. They were chaotic in the mathematical sense, sensitive to initial conditions, their exact positions impossible to calculate more than a few seconds in advance. The Vorkal ships, with their precise formations and coordinated movements, found themselves navigating a space that had become fundamentally unpredictable. 3 Vorkal vessels collided trying to maintain formation while avoiding the mines. 2 more took damage from their own fleet's weapons as targeting solutions crossed paths. The humans should have been dead a dozen times over, but they kept moving, kept changing, kept refusing to do what they were supposed to do. Daniel's ship took hits, catastrophic ones. The hull breached in 7 places. Life support failed on 3 decks. By all rights, they should have been destroyed. Lisa, how's our reactor looking? Daniel asked calmly. We're at 140% capacity, the ensign replied, her voice strained. The containment fields are starting to fail. Can you give me 5 more minutes? Sir, we'll explode. Is that a no? Lisa laughed, a sound that should have been impossible given their circumstances. I'll see what I can do. The Vorkal commander watched his orderly battle devolve into chaos. His ships were taking losses not from superior human tactics but from the sheer unpredictability of human behavior. They were winning, yes. The human ship was dying, but the cost was far higher than any projection had indicated. All ships withdraw, he ordered. This engagement is not cost-effective. Daniel watched the Vorkal fleet jump to hyperspace and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His ship was crippled, his crew exhausted, but they had survived. More importantly, they had added to the growing legend of human unpredictability. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 3 days later. The chamber, carved from a single massive asteroid and decorated with the art of 100 worlds, was filled with representatives from species that had never known the chaos humanity was bringing to their orderly universe. High Counselor Thexler of the Aramian Collective called the session to order. His species had been the architects of the principles of rational warfare, and the human conflict was a personal affront to everything he believed. We must address the human problem, he announced, his translated voice carrying through the chamber. They have now engaged our forces in 47 separate conflicts. By every measure, they should have been defeated within the first month. Yet they persist, and our losses continue to mount. Counselor Vexthai of the Keldurian Empire raised a crystalline appendage. The issue is clear. Humans do not follow rational warfare principles. They sacrifice ships and lives for tactical advantages that make no strategic sense. They pursue objectives with no clear military value. They refuse to surrender when defeat is mathematically certain. They are insane, another counselor stated flatly. Their species must have some fundamental neurological defect that prevents them from processing tactical reality. In the observation gallery, permitted to attend but not speak, sat Ambassador Gregory Stone. He was humanity's first and only representative to the council, a career diplomat who had spent the past 6 months trying to explain his species to beings who fundamentally could not comprehend them. Gregory listened to the counselors debate humanity's sanity and allowed himself a small smile. They were right in their way. Humans were insane by galactic standards. They just didn't understand that this wasn't a weakness. The debate continued for hours. The council reviewed battle reports, analyzed human tactics, and tried desperately to find some pattern, some logic they could exploit. They found none. Every time they thought they understood human strategy, the humans would do something entirely different. Perhaps we should seek a diplomatic solution, suggested Councillor Murallen of the Safian Consortium. If we cannot defeat them militarily, we might negotiate a peace. They would see it as weakness, Thexler replied. Our intelligence suggests humans respect only strength. Showing uncertainty would encourage further aggression. Gregory could have told them they had it backwards. Humans respected strength, yes, but they also respected the wisdom to know when to stop fighting. The Council's rigid insistence on prosecuting the war until humanity submitted was exactly the kind of inflexibility that made humans fight harder. But he remained silent. He had learned that explaining human psychology to the Council was like trying to describe color to a species that had never evolved sight. They could understand the words but not the meaning. The turning point came 3 months later, in a battle that would be forever known as the Kepler Massacre, though historians would argue for decades about which side had actually been massacred. Captain Nicole Sanders commanded a small human task force defending the Kepler 186 colony. She had 4 light cruisers and a destroyer against a Vorkal battle group of 23 ships. The colony held 20,000 civilians who could not be evacuated in time. The logical action was to surrender the colony. The Council had even prepared generous terms. The civilians would be safely relocated, the colony would be placed under Council administration, and the human military forces would be allowed to withdraw with honor. By any rational calculation, it was the best possible outcome. Nicole rejected the terms without even consulting her superiors. "I'm going to tell you how this is going to work," she transmitted to the Vorkal commander. "You're going to turn your fleet around and leave, or I'm going to make you regret ever leaving your homeworld." The Vorkal commander, an experienced officer named Trelmer, almost felt sorry for the deluded human. "Captain Sanders, I have studied your tactics. I have prepared for your unpredictability. I will give you one final chance to surrender." "Noted," Nicole replied. "Katie, you still there?" In a communication room on Mars, Katie Morrison, who had survived the horizon's edge and earned a promotion to fleet intelligence, smiled at her console. "Ready on your mark, Captain. Do it." What the Vorkal didn't know was that humans had been studying them as well. Katie and her team had spent months analyzing every Vorkal communication, every tactical decision, every element of their rigid doctrine. They had found something interesting. The Vorkal were predictable. Perfectly mathematically predictable. Their doctrine didn't allow for improvisation. Every commander was trained to respond to specific situations in specific ways. It made them efficient, coordinated, and unbeatable against any opponent who fought by the same rules. But humans didn't fight by rules. Nicole's ships began transmitting, not battle communications, but music. Specifically, human music, across every frequency the Vorkal used for tactical coordination. Heavy metal, jazz, classical, pop, and genres that no other species had ever conceived of. The cacophony was structured just carefully enough to interfere with Vorkal communications without quite being jammable. The Vorkal fleet's coordination began to break down. Commanders struggled to hear orders over guitar solos and drum beats. Tactical data was corrupted by symphonies. The perfect machine of their fleet was being taken apart by organized noise. While the Vorkal scrambled to adapt, Nicole's ships attacked, not with the kamikaze charges that humans had become known for, but with precise, coordinated strikes against the ships whose commanders were struggling most with the communication breakdown. The humans had learned to be unpredictable when they needed to be, but they had never forgotten how to be efficient. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, the Vorkal had lost 9 ships. Nicole's task force was intact. More importantly, the colony was safe. But the real damage was psychological. The Vorkal had come to expect human insanity, human recklessness, human disregard for calculated odds. They had not expected human intelligence applied in service of that madness. They had not expected the humans to understand them better than they understood themselves. Trelmer, his flagship crippled but functional, sent one final transmission before jumping to hyperspace. We yield this system. But know this, human. You fight in ways that violate every principle of civilized warfare. You embrace chaos and call it strategy. You are not warriors. You are a plague. Nicole's response was broadcast across every human military channel and would become something of a motto for Earth's forces. Then you better hope you've got a cure. The Galactic Council convened again, this time in emergency session. The mood in the chamber was no longer academic discussion, but barely controlled panic. The Vorkal Supremacy, the Council's most powerful military force, was requesting withdrawal from the human conflict. Other species were refusing to commit their fleets. The carefully ordered galaxy was discovering that chaos was contagious. High Counselor Thexler looked older than he had 3 months before. His species aged slowly, but stress could take its toll. We have underestimated them at every turn, he admitted. They do not fight like any known species. They seem to actively reject rational decision-making. Because they do, Gregory Stone said from the observation gallery. The chamber fell silent. Observers were not permitted to speak, but Gregory had decided that diplomatic protocol was less important than preventing the mutual destruction that was beginning to look inevitable. Ambassador Stone, you are out of order, Thexler said, but his voice carried more curiosity than anger. I've been out of order since I got here, Counselor. That's kind of my species thing. Gregory stood and walked to the chamber floor, ignoring the shocked whispers from the assembled counselors. You want to know why you can't beat us? Because you're trying to understand us with reason, and humans aren't reasonable. We're not insane, we're just operating on a different level than you understand. Explain, Thexler commanded. Your species evolved on orderly worlds. Your wars were calculated exchanges of force. You developed mathematics and logic and applied them to everything, including warfare. It works beautifully against each other because you all think the same way. But humans, we evolved as persistence hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We climbed to the top of our food chain not because we were the strongest or fastest, but because we were too stupid to give up. Gregory paced the chamber floor, warming to his subject. You want to know what humans call the principle of fighting until you can't fight anymore, then fighting some more. We call it Tuesday. You want to know what we call tactics that violate every principle of resource management. We call them creative. You want to know what we call a battle where the odds are mathematically impossible. We call it interesting. You embrace irrationality, Counselor Vexthai said, and there was something like horror in her voice. You deliberately reject optimal solutions. We reject the assumption that optimal solutions exist, Gregory corrected. Your principles of rational warfare work in a universe where both sides agree on what rational means. But rationality isn't universal. It's contextual. And in the context of human warfare, the rational move is often to do something completely irrational, because it's the one thing the enemy won't expect. Thexler was silent for a long moment. You are saying that your entire species weaponizes unpredictability. I'm saying we don't think of it as a weapon. We think of it as normal. Every human commander has the authority to ignore orders if they think they have a better idea. Every human soldier is trained to improvise. We don't have a doctrine because we consider doctrine to be a weakness. We're not chaotic because we're trying to be. We're chaotic because we literally don't know any other way to be. Then how can we fight you? Vexthai asked, and the question carried a note of desperation. How can we defend ourselves against an opponent who might do anything? That's the neat part, Gregory said with a smile that was pure human. You can't. At least not the way you've been trying to. You keep sending fleets to defeat us militarily, and we keep finding ways to survive that shouldn't work but do. You could glass Earth and every colony we've established, but it would cost you more ships and lives than you're willing to lose. And we both know it. You propose surrender? Thexler asked. The Council has never surrendered to an inferior force. I propose peace. There's a difference. You stop trying to make us follow your rules, and we stop proving that your rules don't work on us. You let us do our thing in our space, and we'll stay out of your way. Trade, diplomacy, cultural exchange, all the good stuff that makes civilizations flourish, but not subjugation. Not ever. The council erupted in debate. Some counselors argued for continuing the war despite the costs. Others insisted that humanity must be contained somehow. Still others began to see the wisdom in Gregory's proposal. It was Thexler who finally called for order. "Ambassador Stone, if we agree to these terms, can you guarantee that humanity will honor them?" Gregory laughed, and the sound was jarring in the solemn chamber. "Counselor, I can't even guarantee what I'm having for breakfast tomorrow. That's kind of my point. But I can tell you this, humans are much better neighbors than enemies. We're loyal to our friends and absolutely vicious to our enemies. We'd rather trade with you than fight you, but we'll do either one with equal enthusiasm." That is not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be honest. The debate continued for 3 more days. In the end, it was not reason but exhaustion that won the argument. The council had lost hundreds of ships trying to bring humanity to heel. They had spent enormous resources and political capital, and they had achieved nothing except proving that humans could not be defeated by conventional warfare. The Treaty of Terra was signed on a neutral station in orbit around a lifeless moon. Gregory signed for humanity, and Thexler signed for the Council. The terms were simple: mutual recognition of sovereignty, establishment of trade relations, and a provision that humans would be allowed to expand into unclaimed space without Council interference. The last clause had been Gregory's addition, and it had almost derailed the entire treaty. But ultimately, the Council had agreed. They had learned that telling humans where they couldn't go was the surest way to make them go there immediately. After the signing ceremony, Thexler approached Gregory in private. "I must confess something, Ambassador. I still do not understand your species. Your tactics make no sense. Your culture embraces contradiction. You celebrate both cooperation and competition, both logic and emotion, both order and chaos." "That's because all of those things are human," Gregory replied. "We're not one thing. We're all the things all at once. It's messy and contradictory and occasionally disastrous. But it's also why we're still here after 1,000,000 years of evolution, and why we'll be here 1,000,000 years from now. The Council will be watching humanity closely," Thexler warned. "If you prove to be a threat to galactic stability—" "We're absolutely a threat to galactic stability," Gregory interrupted cheerfully. "Your galaxy has been stable for 47,000 years, and stability is just another word for stagnation. We're going to bring change whether you like it or not. New ideas, new art, new ways of thinking about old problems. It's going to be chaotic and uncomfortable and probably more than a little annoying. You speak as if this is desirable. It is. You know what the human word for a living thing that doesn't change is? Dead. Your galactic civilization has been dead for centuries. It just hasn't noticed yet. We're going to wake it up." Thexler regarded the human ambassador with something between respect and dread. "I begin to understand why your species called this conflict a war. It was not a war of conquest or resources. It was a war of ideas." "Every war is a war of ideas," Gregory said. "The bullets and bombs are just how we deliver them. And the idea we were delivering is simple. There's no one right way to exist in this universe. Your way works for you. Our way works for us. And the galaxy is big enough for both." Years later, historians would debate the true outcome of the Human Council War. By every traditional metric, humanity had lost. They had taken more casualties, lost more ships, and controlled less territory at the war's end than they had at its beginning. But they had achieved their objective: recognition as an independent power and the freedom to chart their own course among the stars. The humans called it a victory. The Council called it a negotiated settlement. Both were correct and both were wrong, which was very human and would have frustrated the Council if they had thought about it too long. Admiral Corinne Walsh, promoted after her infamous first battle, stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned EDF vessel Unity and watched Earth turn below. Beside her stood Commander Daniel Price, recovered from his injuries and now her chief tactical officer. "Do you think they'll try again?" Daniel asked. "The Council, I mean. Do you think they'll find some way to bring us to heel?" Corinne shook her head. "They can't. Not without becoming like us, and that scares them more than we do. They'll watch us, maybe try to contain us diplomatically, but they won't fight us again. We taught them something they never wanted to learn." "What's that?" That the universe doesn't care about their rules. That chaos is not a flaw in the system but a feature. That the only way to survive in an unpredictable universe is to become unpredictable yourself. She smiled. They called us insane. They said our madness would destroy us. But in the end, our madness is what saved us, because you can't fight crazy with reason. You can only learn to live with it. Below them, Earth continued its ancient rotation, home to 8 billion people who would never stop pushing boundaries, questioning assumptions, and doing things that made no sense to anyone but themselves. The galaxy had tried to tame them and failed. Now it would have to learn to coexist with them. It was going to be an interesting few thousand years. On the bridge of a Vorkal science vessel, positioned at the edge of human space, a junior analyst named Kextil reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The humans had just established 3 new colonies in regions the Council had deemed too dangerous for habitation. One was in a binary star system with unstable gravitational fields. Another was on a moon with extreme temperature variations. The third was inside a nebula where sensor readings were almost impossible. By any rational standard, these were terrible locations for colonies. They would require enormous resources to maintain, offered limited strategic value, and subjected the colonists to unnecessary danger. No council species would ever approve such projects. The humans had established all 3 in a single month. Kextil added these findings to his growing report on human expansion patterns. He was trying to develop a predictive model, some way to anticipate where humans would go next. After 2 years of work, his model had achieved a prediction accuracy of approximately 12%. He was beginning to suspect that 12% might be the theoretical maximum. His supervisor, Trelmer, the same commander who had faced Nicole Sanders at Kepler 186, entered the lab. The battle had cost him his fleet command, but he had been given this research position as recognition of his experience with human tactics. "Any progress?" Trelmer asked. "None whatsoever," Kextil replied. "I have analyzed 17,000 human military engagements, 300,000 individual decisions, and approximately 6 million data points. My conclusion is that human behavior is genuinely random at the individual level, but becomes statistically predictable only in the largest scale aggregations. Meaning, I can tell you with reasonable confidence what humanity as a whole will do over the next century. They will expand, innovate, and occasionally do something catastrophically stupid that somehow works out in their favor. But I cannot tell you what any individual human will do next week, tomorrow, or in the next 5 minutes." Trelmer made a gesture that translated roughly to sardonic amusement. "I could have told you that 2 years ago and saved you considerable effort. Science requires empirical verification," Kextil replied with dignity. "Besides, the Council needed formal confirmation that humans are, in technical terms, impossible. And yet they persist. Indeed. I have begun to wonder if impossibility is itself a human survival trait. They seem to thrive on doing things that should not work." Trelmer looked at the display showing human territorial expansion. It resembled nothing so much as a splash of water frozen in time, reaching out in every direction without pattern or plan. "I have a theory," he said, "unscientific but satisfying. I would hear it. I believe the universe itself does not know what to do with humans. Reality keeps presenting them with unsurvivable situations, and they keep surviving anyway out of sheer confused stubbornness. Eventually, the universe will give up trying to kill them and accept that humans are simply going to be here, doing incomprehensible things forever." Kextil considered this. "That is indeed unscientific. It anthropomorphizes the universe, suggests intentionality where none exists, and relies on metaphysical assumptions that cannot be tested. But it explains the observed data better than any theory I have developed." They stood together in silence, watching humanity spread across the galaxy like a beautiful, terrible chaos made manifest. Behind them, computers continued their futile attempt to predict the unpredictable, to rationalize the irrational, to understand a species that defied understanding. Somewhere in human space, A young lieutenant named Jake Morris was about to make a decision that would start a diplomatic incident, save 300 lives, and accidentally establish first contact with a species that had been hiding from the galaxy for 10,000 years. He would do this by ignoring his orders, trusting his instincts, and acting on information that was technically classified above his clearance level. When asked later why he had done it, he would shrug and say, "It seemed like a good idea at the time." This statement would be analyzed by Council xenopsychologists for months. They would produce 700 pages of analysis attempting to understand the decision-making process behind such an action. They would fail. The concept of seeming like a good idea at the time would become a shorthand among Council species for the fundamental incomprehensibility of human thought. But humans would continue doing things that seemed like good ideas at the time. They would continue making decisions that violated every principle of rational planning. They would continue surviving situations that should have killed them and thriving in environments that should have been impossible. Because that was what humanity did. That was what humanity had always done. And that was what humanity would always do, for as long as there were stars to reach for and boundaries to push against. The galaxy had called them insane. They had accepted the label with pride. And their madness, their beautiful, terrible, incomprehensible madness, had won them a place among the stars that no amount of reason ever could have achieved. High above Earth, the Unity completed its patrol route and prepared to jump to hyperspace. On the bridge, Karen Walsh reviewed the day's reports with a mixture of pride and exasperation. Her fleet had prevented a mining accident, resolved a territorial dispute, and accidentally discovered a new form of exotic matter while trying to fix a malfunctioning coffee maker. It was, she reflected, a perfectly normal day for humanity. "Set course for Tau Ceti," she ordered. "And someone please explain to engineering that particle accelerators are not appropriate coffee-making tools, no matter how well they work." Daniel grinned. "Should I mention that the exotic matter might revolutionize power generation?" "Not yet. Let's give the Council another week before we accidentally change the galaxy again. They're still recovering from the last time." The Unity jumped to hyperspace, carrying its crew of beautiful madmen and women into the infinite possibilities of an orderly galaxy that had just learned to love chaos. Behind it, Earth continued to spin, home to a species that had been called insane and had proven that sometimes, in the cold mathematics of the universe, madness was the most rational response of all. The war was over. The real fun was just beginning.